You are listening to Inside IASB, a podcast series dedicated to informing and encouraging Illinois School Board members.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Isaac Warren, and I am the Director of Digital Communications at the Illinois Association of School Boards. And with me today, I've got Deborah and Donna Cain, who are both members on their school boards, and they're going to be talking about their leadership legacy and multi-generational leadership in their family. So Donna, Deborah, thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So let's just start with you, Donna. Can you take us back to your earliest memories of public service in your family?
Sure. So as I shared before, my father was president of the school board of the elementary school that I attended. And I believe he was elected when I was about 6 years old. And I have to admit, kind of not necessarily regarding my father. Originally, when he went on the school board, they were having some issues with their school lunch program. So my mom was a hospital dietitian when she got out of college. So she ended up working in the kitchen for a little while. And so I used to take the bus from elementary school to the middle school while she was working. And when I've been thinking back on this, it really indicated to me like how important every aspect of schools are, whether for the school lunches to academics. And then when I was about 10, there was a dispute between the teachers and the school board. And so the teachers were all wearing red bands around their arms to indicate their opposition to something. I have to admit, being 10 years old, I didn't know exactly what they were upset about. But I remember my teacher taking me aside saying, "I know your dad's on the board. We're not upset with your dad." I'm like, well, he was out of the country at the time for work. So I'm like, I know you're not upset with my dad. But again, understanding that relationship between the staff and the board was important for me to understand at that point. And then later on, I got to be the courier between my dad and the school. So I'd take the diplomas home for him to sign and bring them back for graduation. And I always thought that was kind of fun. But I think it showed me the importance of the school board and what they do.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks, Donna, for sharing that. Deborah, I'm going to throw the same question to you as well. Can you tell us about your earliest memories of public service in your family?
So when I was in elementary school, like the first kind of memory I have knowing that my dad was doing something with the school board was when I got pulled out of class to come down and take pictures with the other kids at the time of the school board. So that was kind of like first realization of it. And then basically I don't remember exactly what grade I was in, but from very early in elementary school all the way through high school, one of my parents was on a board for the school I was with. And so for me, that was always a really interesting experience because whenever I was having an issue in school, I could go to my parents and I could talk to them about it. And I could see them actually taking action on the advice I was giving them. Here's an issue I don't like, or I don't like how we're doing that. And I could see them go to the school board meeting or go to the administration and actually talk to people and make changes. And so that was my early experience of just seeing the direct impact of I could say something and I could see how they were able to advocate and make changes and move the building.
Gotcha. Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. And Deborah, just make sure I got this right. You're a fourth generation board member on one side and a third generation on the other. Is that right?
I'm going to double check with my mom. I know third for both sides.
Yeah, that's correct. So third on my side, my father was up on the District 48 board. I've been on the District 88 board. Deborah's father was actually on the 45 board, which she now serves on. And then his father was also on a school board up in McHenry. And then his father was actually on the Antioch school board when he was growing up.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for verifying that. So for both of you, what does that legacy mean to each of you personally? Let's start with Deborah on this one.
To me, that legacy, it's very important. And that at first it gives me a little bit extra responsibility. Like especially running in this community, I know when I was elected, some people did it because they know my parents. They knew my last name and they knew what that meant. And so I have this obligation, I feel, on the board to be doing my best there to be the most informed, because my mom's on this other school board. And if I'm worried if I do anything too wrong, I would badly reflect on her. But then also I feel like because I'm on the board my dad was on, I also know people expect kind of fiscal responsibility from me. And they expect me to continue the legacy he did. And I also want to protect his name and legacy on the board. So there's an extra responsibility there. But it also, just to me, it feels like education is so important to me, public service, and everything I do, and like community love. And it's just something that's in my blood. And it's something that I just feel like I owe it to my community to do the best that I can. So it's both the extra responsibility of I got to do my best because I owe it to my family who have got a needless position, but also I owe it to my community because that's what I've been taught.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thank you. Donna, same question to you.
Yes, for myself, I think growing up with having my dad being on the school board, my dad was also an attorney, so very involved in the community. I saw the impact of being involved, and that's something I always wanted to do. So even like growing up, when I was in high school, I was very involved. When I was in college and law school, I was also involved. So when I got out of law school, it was just kind of natural that I would get involved. So, I became involved in the chamber first, and then I was appointed to the school board.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I can imagine for both of you growing up in this environment where your school board leadership is really a kind of like a foundational part of both your upbringings. It's just almost felt like a natural, like, yeah, that's my turn, I guess. Is that kind of a fair statement?
Yeah, I think I'm probably the only person in elementary school knew they were going to be on the school board one day.
I was probably the same way. I don't know if I would have run for the school board, but there was a vacancy. And so I knew the superintendent he was involved in Rotary with my husband. And so I talked with him about it. And, being appointed was easier for me than having to run initially. And so I've enjoyed being on the school board, obviously.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. For both of you, what inspired you to step into school board service yourselves? You kind of answered this a little bit already. And was it like a conscious passing of the torch, or did it unfold more organically?
Again, I always knew I wanted to be on the school board. It was just kind of a matter of when do I go and be on the school board. And so I actually knew one of the people that was on District 45 school board, and they were debating whether or not they wanted to run again. I was debating if I was ready to be on the school board at that time. I knew we're in my career, I have my family life, I'm tired. And I was like, is this the right time? And then I just kind of felt at one point, like, no, I really want to do this. I always wanted to be on the school board. Here's a good opportunity for me to do it. So I think it was like the week that the petitions were due, and I just went out and got all my signatures and was like, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to run. So it was kind of both. I always knew I would do it one day, but it was just when it happened, it was like, this is the time.
Sure. Yeah. Donna, you did kind of hint on this, answer your question, whatever you wouldn't mind. Same question to you as well.
I had some interaction with the school board before being appointed to the board. I actually was representing a student in an expulsion hearing. And so being on the other side, getting to see that reminded me that I did want to be more involved in the school. So when that opening came up, it was a great opportunity for me to get involved and then to be able to take on different roles within the board.
Your family also carries a multi-generational legacy of women in law. So how has that shaped your perspectives as board members? Donna, let's start with you.
I think as being an attorney on the school board, it's very helpful because there's a lot of issues that do come up. I am very careful being an attorney, recognizing the fact that I'm not the board's attorney. So I will always defer to the attorney, but there are times where I can help other board members understand why the attorney's giving us the advice that they're giving us. But I think also being an attorney in the community, we have the opportunity to hear a lot of the issues and concerns that people within the community are having. And so understanding, especially we're real estate attorneys, that's a big part of our practice. And real estate is such an indicator of what's going on in the economy. Oftentimes in the school, being on a school board, you have to anticipate what's going to happen in the economy when you're making plans and things like that. So it's been very helpful to be able to have that background being on the school board and being able to anticipate, things that we need to worry about, and also being able to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our community.
Gotcha. Yeah. And Deborah, anything to add there?
Yeah. So when I was in law school, I took like every course I could related to education law and government law. disability rights, like that. I was debating at that time, well, when I just be an education lawyer. And I decided against that because in my view, being a lawyer, it is my job to make sure that the law is being applied, that it is being applied equally, and that it is being applied accurately. But that doesn't mean it's always fair and equitable. That doesn't mean it always works the way it should. And if I wanted to do the best for students, that would be being on the board. And so being a lawyer on the board, it does mean when we get things from our attorney, I understand what they're doing. I know what they're doing. I can judge if we have a good attorney or not, which is also helpful. But then there are other legal things that come up that even though it's not my area of law, I know how to read the law, I know how to read policy, and I know how to question things. I think one of the biggest things about being a lawyer for me is every board meeting when we're making decisions, I find it important to lay a foundation for why I'm making the decision I am. So I ask questions I know the answer to, just because I want the community to know that I'm hearing them, I know what they're concerned about, and that I also know that they know that I'm thinking through the issues, and that I figured out that this is why I'm making the decision I am. Where I'm always thinking about that foundation of what I'm hearing. And also, I mean, with being a lawyer, I do think people expect other things out of us. I mean, especially women in the law, there are different obligations and responsibilities. So I do feel like when I'm up there, I'm also representing lawyers. I'm representing female lawyers, and I have a responsibility to do my best there.
Sure, absolutely. And it's really cool because you both have this very unique perspective where you're thinking like a lawyer, but you can also think like a board member. While other, like your board lawyers are thinking probably primarily as lawyers, and then the board members are thinking primarily as board members. So you're almost able to kind of act like this middle person of like, let me translate kind of like back and forth in a way of like, here's the lawyer's needs for the board's needs for the lawyers. Just kind of, I think your boards would find that expertise is really valuable to have, just to have someone who's familiar, right? Yeah.
Well, and the other things, since we both have had training as mediators, that comes in very handy when in negotiations, understanding just, sometimes people come into negotiations like, well, it's got to be my way. And having had that background as being trained as mediators and being attorneys, we understand that, the goal is not necessarily always to have your own way, but to come to an agreement that everybody can live with.
And this is a very unique setup here. We've got serving together as mother and daughter. I mean, I'd be on a separate board, just very rare, I would say. So what has that experience been like, both maybe rewarding and challenging?
So today is the anniversary of my first year on the board. So I was involved exactly 1 year ago today. I am incredibly thankful to my mom. I'm also very thankful for my dad because I have had so many questions. There are so many things I am wanting to learn. It's just hard to learn everything that you need to learn about the board, with the finances, with curriculum, with employment. Like, there are just so many questions, and I have the best resource because, there are other members on the board I could go to, but, you have Open Meeting Act. You don't want to, you know what they're doing, but that doesn't always mean they were doing things right. And so I just have another resource that I could always go to get those answers. And it's been incredibly helpful, especially I got elected and I learned that our board was not in a financially stable situation. And so I felt like I had to learn incredibly quickly of all the finances. And my mom, who's also an accountant, has been super, super helpful for me, being like, how do I read this budget? How do I ask these questions? So, I mean, I always say that I have a privilege of having both my parents having been on the school board. I feel like I'm cheating in some ways with all the other new school board members. They don't have this amazing resource that I do. But it's been rewarding in so many ways. Just I feel like I can be a very good school board member right off the bat because I just have the most amazing resource.
Yeah, that's awesome. Donna, what do you think?
Yeah, I was very excited when Deborah was elected to the 45 board. For the high school district, we have 3 feeder schools. And it's difficult because each school has, every district has its own personality. And so being on the high school is you have to prepare for, all these students coming in from different backgrounds. So it is helpful to have that insight. My husband was on the 45 board before I was appointed to the 88 board. And oftentimes we would come home and, have discussions about what we learned at the board meetings. And I remember coming home one time saying, do you realize that 20% of our kids come in below reading level? He goes, well, 80% of our kids are at reading level. Well, it was like the perspective of how the information was being shared. And so it gave us opportunities to talk about what can both districts do better in making that transition. During that period of time, I think our superintendents at all four school districts did much better jobs of articulating. They would start meeting regularly. We have at least one annual meeting with all of the school boards to, talk about an issue that is prevalent within schools at that time. So I think it makes me a better board member. Plus, I sometimes worry that since I've been on the board since 2004, maybe I'm not relevant. And having somebody younger who's more recently graduated is helpful for me to make sure that I'm being relevant.
Sure. Well, on that topic of relevancy, how do generational differences show up in how you each approach leadership, governance, and decision making? And Donna, since you kind of started off that question, I'll throw it back to you first.
One of the things when I, as president of the school board, I speak at graduation. And in recent years, it's reminded me that I've been on the board longer than these kids have been alive. So I always kind of say, I've been preparing for this day for 18 years. And so trying to always have to anticipate what do we need to worry about 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But I think one of the things that Deborah helps me to remember sometimes is maybe I've gotten a little cynical as I've gotten older. So reminding me that, some of these things maybe aren't as critical or as important, or maybe other things are more important that we have to worry about. So I think from that standpoint, it's kind of reminding me to kind of look through other eyes, not just my own.
Sure. Yeah. Deborah, same question to you. How would you think this changes in your perspective?
So, I mean, very similar to what she said. So, we had our 8th graders come in and reach the 8th graders to be board representatives. And they would talk about what they would do in school. And I literally just sit there and go like, yeah, I did that. They talk about teachers that they found influential. And I go, yeah, I had that teacher. Because I'm so, I've been out of school for a while, but there's a lot of experiences that I can sit there and I go, I had that experience. So I think that's one way in which I feel very connected to the students. And I'm really, I struggled in school quite a bit. Again, I was very privileged to have my parents on the school board, but I switched to homeschooling for a bit. I went to an alternative schooling program. I really struggled to get through it. And so I'm always thinking about these students that really are struggling in school, the ones that we're not really catching because they're not necessarily needing that extra assistance, and they're not the ones that are in their advanced academics. So I'm always thinking about those middle students that we're just not catching. And so the generational thing is just, I feel like I'm looking at what the school to do, and I'm like, I took that test. I did that project. I've experienced what you've experienced. So I still have that. I still have that memory and can kind of relate to the students in that way. And then also, I think I am younger. I'm struggling in the financial situation of the country at the moment. And it's hard for me to get a savings, to feel like I'm making ends meet. So I also feel like I'm very sympathetic to teachers in a way that I think can be harder just when you've never really had to really struggle in the same way of I'm barely making ends meet. So, I view my role as both. I get this from my boss where my role is to be there for the student and to be there for the teachers at the same time. I am there to represent everybody. I want the best school, which means you have to make sure everyone's taken care of. So I think I just have a sympathy. My mom said cynical. I just think I have a sympathy and an understanding that maybe, just based off when I'm aging and whereas I'm the same age as some of these teachers, she's also some of the age of the teachers that are retiring. So it's kind of that balance there. And I know that the new teachers are going through.
Yeah. And both of what you guys shared is really intriguing to see how the different generations kind of have approached the thinking. Like Deborah, you're more close to the students, and I guess because you're more recently from that school district. Donna, you self-admitted you've been on the board longer than some of these kids have been in school. So it's really interesting to see how different the approaches to thinking about how do I best serve my board with my level of expertise and my knowledge. And it just kind of accumulates year over year. So I think that's just really intriguing to see the difference there. And let's say for listeners who are parents or maybe have children, thinking about civic involvement, what advice would you offer about nurturing leadership across generations? Deborah, we'll start with you.
I honestly think just leading by example. I don't think my parents ever tried to talk me into doing any of these things. I just saw them do it. I went to Rotary with my dad. I went to the chamber events with my mom. And so as I got older, as I went to work for her, I just sat here and I'm like, well, I'm going to just do those things too. I know what's important. So I'm now the president of our chamber. I serve on a commission in our community. You know, I just followed her example and I just go, this is what I know. I think my role is to help my community. And she didn't preach it to me. She just showed me it. She just led by example. And I went, this is important. I saw how advocacy works. I saw what it's like to be involved in your community. And I just got to look at two really good examples and just follow them.
Cool. Yeah. Donna, same question over to you.
Deborah kind of summed it up, you know, because my husband and I were both basically self-employed most of the time as the kids were growing up. We didn't really want to keep them in with babysitters or whatever when not necessary. So our kids actually kind of grew up in the office. We always had one of us might work from home, or we had a space in the office that they'd come after school and do homework. Sometimes, they would go to events with us. They, whether it was through the chamber or school or whatever, they were just always there. So they were just a part of everything that we did. And I think it gave them that confidence too of they, going to these events, they knew who the superintendent was. I remember one of the kids, there was a day it was anticipated snowing the next day. So the superintendent joked with one of our daughters about, well, should I call a snow day tomorrow? And they said, oh, yes. And so the next day when the snow day was called, they thought it was because they did it. But I think, it allowed them to realize the importance of being involved. And it struck me that in reading these questions, what we need to do for the younger generation on helping them to know how to be involved, because I think in school, there's so many opportunities for leadership and service and to be involved. But after they get out of high school and college, it's hard to find their place. And we maybe need to figure out where are those places that younger people can be involved, because I think there's a desire to be involved. There's a desire to do more service, but not necessarily knowing how to or where to.
Just to close out this episode, question for both of you. What does it mean to each of you to be serving your communities together? Let's start with you, Donna.
I've always wanted to have some type of purpose in my life. And as an attorney and being on the school board and being involved in the community, I'm allowed to do that. And I always feel that, if I've made somebody's day better, then I'm successful. I don't necessarily I've never measured my success based upon how much money I made or my status or anything like that. But is the world a little bit better today because I was here and I was able to do something to make it better?
Gotcha. Yeah. Deborah, same question to you.
So when I went to law school, I remember writing in my essay to get in, I didn't know if I actually wanted to be a lawyer. What I knew was that knowing the law would help me serve my community. And I had watched my parents be on school boards, be on commissions in the village, serve on different organizations, and that having this law degree would be the best way for me to help people. And as soon as I graduated and I came to work with my mom, I feel like I jumped feet first into just doing everything I can for my community. And I go to every event I can. I try to give as much money as I can. I try to just do everything I can for my community. And serving with my mom, the best thing about it is when I'm looking at our preschool coming in or our kindergarten coming in, I can look and say, I have 8 years to make these kids ready for high school. And then when they get there, I know they're in good hands. Because to me, I think sometimes school board members, they look at their school and they go, I need to make my school the best it can be. And I'm going, I need to make sure that these kids are successful later on in life. And so I am so invested into JDA and so invested in the high school and wanting them to do well, because it means that my students are going to have the best success. And so just being able to work with my mom and being like, we have this ability to really make things good for children, it's the most valuable part.
Awesome. Well, that's so inspiring to hear from both of you. Thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your family story and how you guys got into your positions, and looking forward to seeing how you lead the next generation of students and learners and leaders. Again, just a very inspiring story. So thank you for sharing it here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to the podcast, and thank you for your dedicated volunteer service to public education. If you would like to stay up to date with future episodes, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, or your platform of choice. Have a comment or question? We welcome listener feedback and invite you to send us an email at communications@iasb.com. Thank you.